friends, it's Jen here making a new video. It's been a while since I've been on here. I had to take some time to work through some things and figure out kind of the direction that I wanted to take this channel. And I've decided that it's a good time for me to talk about my own experience being raised in a high control religion and how I overcame some patterns that came from being raised in that way, and kind of talk a little bit about my healing journey personally. So I want to talk a little bit about what it is that happens to us when we're in a high control religion, and then identify some ways that I saw that it impacted me, and then talk about some of the healing modalities that I've used to undo and transmute some of the patterns that I saw showing up in my life. So first, a high control religion, also is a definition of a cult, is a group, a closed group that has a strong dogma, and there's a pattern of indoctrination, and there's a lot of control about how you can behave and act. You don't have a lot of autonomy in a high control group, and you have to follow the rules or there's punishment. So that's how I was raised as a Jehovah's Witness. And it's not only that I was raised that way, but my mother was raised that way, and my grandmother was raised that way, and her mother was raised that way. So it's in our family lineage as well. My father, on the other hand, came into the religion as an adult, and so he was very fervent about the belief in the religion. And in combination with my mother, who had been indoctrinated over generations, it was a very strict household that we were raised in regards to believing and following the dogma of the religion. So that puts me as a child, just as a frame of reference, that my entire community and my entire family and my family lineage all held this belief system and this way of being and the dogma of this religion as everything. We weren't really allowed to associate outside of the religion with others too much. So it was like being in a subculture. So it's a very like a cultural paradigm that we were raised within. And it's been referred to what happens in these kind of situations, and I can't speak for every cult or situation. I only speak for my experience being raised as a Jehovah's Witness, as a fourth generation Jehovah's Witness. My experience, so a lot of people will call it brainwashing, and that's a controversial term. I looked it up in Wikipedia because I was like, what exactly is the definition of brainwashing? And it's a term that came into play about in the 1950s, and it was also used to try to understand how propaganda and high control situations within different cultures like North Korea and in China during the Korean War and Nazi Germany, how those created situations where people did things that maybe they might not have done if they hadn't have been polarized into a way of thinking. So it's controversial. I'm not sure if brainwashing actually describes what I experienced, although it possibly could. Definitely there was constant propaganda. Definitely everyone in my world held the same worldview, and there was definitely indoctrination through regular meetings and study and messaging about what the dogma was and how we were to behave. There were some other things, though, that I want to talk about in this video that happened to us as children that may be affecting us still as adults, that I've noticed had affected me as an adult, that I had to really work through. And I want to talk about that. So one of the other things I wanted to say right off the top is that no one is broken. No one is broken. I mean, there are some cases of people that have been also abused within that religion, like if you've experienced incest or sexual abuse or severe beatings, yes, you may have some trauma in addition to having to overcome the patterns and the imprint of the high control religion, and that trauma may need to be worked with. I'm not talking about that today. I was not a victim of incest. I was not sexually abused within the and I did not receive excessive beatings, although there was corporal punishment. So we will talk about that a little bit. But I do want to honor everyone's experience. A lot of times in those high control religions, and especially in the Jehovah's Witness religion, people did experience sexual abuse and severe emotional and physical abuse. And so I don't want to deny that experience. That's just not my experience, and so I can't speak to that. My experience is just being raised in this very different subculture, and how I had to notice as I reintegrated into the broader American culture outside of that religion that I was different, and I had some things to work with. Okay. Let me see if I have any. Oh, there is also something called spiritual trauma, which to some degree I did experience, but maybe not to the degree that others might have experienced it in other cults or religions. And spiritual trauma is defined as having been shamed or intimidating using the scriptures, like with a fear of God put into you. And we did experience that in my religion growing up, fear of God. And I did experience having scriptures, like whenever I would get in trouble, there would be a long time out, and then there would be a long time sitting and listening to Bible scriptures being read to me, to shame me for whatever behavior I had that they didn't like. It could have been something as innocuous as not cleaning my room. And then I was expected to take accountability and apologize and then go clean my room. So there was this kind of coercion using scriptures and fear of God. And that is defined as spiritual trauma. And so that's just something to be aware of, that could affect how you react or relate to spirituality as an adult. So, like I said, nobody's broken. I don't think anybody's broken. But I do want to acknowledge that some people might have some other extenuating circumstances or trauma or mental health issues that they need to seek specific help with. And I honor that. For me, it's about undoing stories, questioning stories, questioning behavior patterns, acknowledging in the ways that we act or react and why things happen to us that maybe don't happen to other people, and finding some kind of balance, and then just removing those stories that don't serve us. The mind, that's how the mind works, right? The mind works to create stories that make us safe. And when stories are put on to us, and then the mind is working within that paradigm, we just have to be consciously aware of it. We have to bring subconscious things that were imprinted onto us through the religion into our conscious awareness so that we can work with it. And so that's how I've worked with it, is by doing a lot of holistic work to bring subconscious stories into my conscious awareness. And then also working with balance. As I find that there can be these polarizing situations. So if you were taught something very extreme this way, and then you consciously become aware that that's not right, there can be a tendency to go the extreme the other way, like a pendulum swing to balance it. But actually then you end up in another unbalanced position. And so it's always for me about bringing balance to perspectives. So, and then being empowered to make choices, right? Because now that you're outside of a high control religion, nobody's dogmatically telling you what to do or believe. Then you kind of have to decide, well, what do I believe? And so sometimes we can feel disempowered to make our own choices because we've never had to before. We've always just been told what to believe. So finding that inner strength to be empowered and to make our own choices. And I think a lot of people in the world find themselves in that situation, whether you're raised in a high control religion or not. That's something where empowering women is a common theme. Empowering people of color, empowering people across socioeconomic divides to have the confidence to stand up and say, this is what I need and this is what I want. Okay, so how I've experienced the impact of this, being raised as a Jehovah's Witness in my adult life, now that I've left that religion. I left that religion probably right around the time my son was born. So I was 22, and I walked away from it completely. I'm 52 now, so 30 years to unpack it, right? And so I just want to share some of that with you so that if maybe it helps you. It was not okay for us to ask questions when we were in that religion. So all of my childhood, it was not okay for me to ask questions or to question any adult in my sphere. I had a deeply subconscious belief that it's rude to ask questions. And I even remember my sister, who was disabled, she had polio as a child, and so she was disformed and from severe scoliosis. And sometimes people would come up to her and ask her like what was wrong with her or what happened to her. And she was so horrified at receiving that question. Mind you, she was also still in the religion. She was so horrified at that question as a disabled person, feeling so uncomfortable in her appearance and her skin, that she really thought it was so rude, and she really imprinted that on me as well. So I'm not sure if that belief comes directly just from the religion, or if it's also compounded by the fact that I had this experience of my poor sister being horrified at children staring at her and thinking she was unattractive. She had kind of the moon face from being on prednisone for so long because she had a diminished lung capacity from the polio. So she would really be upset when children would ask her questions. So I also had that experience of questioning. So anyways, I had a deeply subconscious belief that asking questions is rude. So I tend not to ask questions, and I have to really remind myself that I can ask questions, especially about things that relate to me or people that want to be a part of my circle. So that's one. And then the opposite of that, because I'm always aware of the pendulum swing. So the opposite of that is that I can tend to be overly analytical, right? So I can really overly question or overthink things. And so I have to always be balancing my subconscious desire to not ask questions with my pendulum swing to overanalyze, and then come back to a place of balance with that, where I can ask questions, get the information that I need, but not overthink it. Okay. The next one that I struggled with is that we were taught to be very polite and very kind and no drama. Drama was not acceptable. And we would be actually physically punished, spanked, if we did not sit still through lengthy meetings, if we were making too much noise, if we were told not to make noise or to sit still and we didn't, then we were considered disobedient. We would be spanked. So I learned to be invisible and have no voice. And I have really struggled with that as an adult, where I don't speak up. I just observe and I notice and I know something is wrong or I'm being treated wrong, but I don't always speak up for myself, or I assume that everybody else notices and sees that it's wrong too, and that I don't need to say anything, which isn't always the case. And then the pendulum swing of that is I will overspeak, or I will speak the obvious sometimes. So I'll feel like I have to say something, and I'll find my strength to not be invisible, and I will do something that's cringy. So that's the thing. And it's also important for me to just remember that I am a part of a contributing circle group now in my community, and that I don't need to be invisible. Literally, my grandmother was one of the people that would say like children should be seen and not heard. So for any of us that experienced that from being raised by older parents, maybe that were raised in a different time, my parents were much older than me, than most parents of people my age, and so those kinds of ideas were still very prevalent in my family, in addition to having in addition to having any kind of normal childhood behavior like moving around and talking and asking questions, be kind of punished out of us. Okay, so the next thing is that we were taught that we were intrinsically bad. And I don't think this is just Jehovah's Witnesses, but I think a lot of religions teach that we're imperfect, that Jesus had to come down here and be murdered in order to save us from ourselves because we're so imperfect. And I'm nothing against that teaching. Like, I think there's a whole metaphorical different understanding of that sacrifice that I understand now as a spiritual person that's a little bit different than how I received the message as a child. And it's possible that the dogma didn't mean to put it on me in such a way that it sounded like I was intrinsically bad and imperfect. And maybe that was just my child perception of that teaching. But that's how I took it, that I was a bad person, and that I had a lot of work to do to make God be happy with me. So that did a couple of things for me. The patterns that I picked up from that were that if other people are dysregulated around me, it's my fault. I often take blame or responsibility. If someone suggests that I did something wrong and I just don't see my own behavior, I will feel bad and I will try to fix it. and I'm very susceptible to gaslighting. I just assume that, I must have done something wrong, or I upset this person, and so it's my job to fix it. So I've had to learn as an adult that it's actually not my responsibility to fix other people, and that even if I trigger someone, I can have compassion and be empathetic and hold space for working through that problem. But our feelings are our own. So if I get triggered and I have feelings that arise, I have to work through those feelings. I can't blame outside of myself for how I'm feeling. And likewise, when somebody else is triggered and has feelings and wants to lash out at me, I can certainly take feedback, constructive feedback, but I don't need to take blame or responsibility for someone else's feelings. That's for them. And if they're dysregulated, same thing. That's not my responsibility. It's for them to get regulated and to recognize their own work and to do their own work. Certainly we can hold space for people to do their work. We can be compassionate and empathetic, but it's important not to allow yourself to be gaslit, which we were gaslit consistently as children in that religion and told things that were not true. And we internalized and believed them. I did. Okay. The next thing that I want to talk about is demonizing. So a lot of things were demonized for us as in that religion. Things like if you, other religions were specifically demonized a lot, and other spiritual beliefs were demonized. So like if you brought in a Native American totem into your home, it could bring demons into your home. And then there was all kinds of crazy stories about demons and how they would torment you. And it was very scary to think of demons as a child. So the last thing you wanted was demons to come into your home. And demon stories were very prevalent within the religion. And what it did was it modeled for us a form of fault finding and fear of things that were perceived as unsafe. And so sometimes I will look for reasons to not accept things into my life. Like I'll be very critical, but then the opposite of that is I'm very non-judgmental and I'll allow everything into my life. So I tend to be very non-judgmental of people and very understanding of the issues they're working with and of the patterns that they have because of abuse that they suffered. So I tend to be very non-judgmental. And at the same time, I'm sometimes super critical or leery of things that I think might harm me. So there's this kind of hypervigilance about things that might come into my sphere that would cause me that would cause me unease. And then also this opposite reaction of being super inclusive, non-judgmental, which can allow me to let actually very toxic people into my life, because I don't see them as toxic. I don't like to judge people as toxic anyways. I don't like to think that anybody's even broken. So there's this thing that I have to struggle with, that I have to kind of bring into balance and say, like, okay, I see you, and I can be totally accepting of who you are, but I also need to have boundaries for myself. And so that brings me into the next one, which is, we had no expectation of privacy in that religion. There were public shaming was modeled for us, where if somebody did something wrong or broke the rules, the whole congregation was informed. There was, we had to tell on family members or others within the congregation if we saw wrongdoing, otherwise we would get in trouble. And when I say in trouble, the trouble we would get in could be as severe as being cut off from your family and all contacts within the religion, which is your entire community. And then there, so because we had no expectation of privacy, because public shaming was modeled for us, I tend to be an open book. So I kind of overshare sometimes. And that's why, even though I'm a fairly introverted person, I can come out here on YouTube and just bare my soul. And I write a blog about everything I come across in my life that causes me to pause and think. And so boundaries are like a foreign concept to me. And I've really had to work on the concept of boundaries. And I'm always working on that concept. Some people think of boundaries as just like blocking and cutting off people, and I almost never block anyone or cut them out of my life at all. I always leave a door open. It's very rare that I will have to block someone, and that's only when I feel that there's been like some huge trust violations, and for my own well-being and not turning in on myself, I just need to not allow myself to think that they're gonna walk back through that door. So I have to just close it. So the boundaries piece, it's boundaries for me. Healthy boundaries are not about blocking. Healthy boundaries are about saying how you want to be treated and what's safe and okay for you. And then it's about me, what's safe and okay for me. It's not about telling other people how to behave or what to do. It's about what's okay for me. And if you want to be with me, this is how you can approach me. And then if they continue to violate those boundaries, which a lot of times they do because they have their own behavior patterns that they're working with and they can't not, it's okay if they violate my boundaries, so long as they can be like, hey, sorry, I recognize that I violated your boundaries and made you feel unsafe, and I appreciate you being patient with me, and let's try this again. I can live with that. But if there's zero remorse and they just want to blame me for them treating me bad, that's a hard no for me. And so boundaries for me are about telling people how you want to be treated. You have to actually speak it. You can't just block them and run away and avoid. You have to say, this is how I want to be treated. And if they can step into that, great. And if they can't, well, then at some point, if they continue to violate those boundaries, you do have to cut them off and say that that's not okay for me. And I've had to cut some people off in my life because they couldn't approach me in a way that felt safe for me. And I was very transparent with them about what I needed. It wasn't like just a cold turkey and they had no idea why I cut them off. There was many conversations before I got to the point of saying like, okay, I'm going to go in a different direction, and I'm shutting this conversation down. So learning how to work with boundaries without going to the extreme of just blocking people, without speaking to them first and letting them know what's acceptable or what they did that made you feel unsafe. There's this balance, right? So from having no boundaries to having an extreme reaction. We have to find the middle. I tend to skew still towards having no boundaries, which does not serve me well. And it's something I'm constantly working with. And I'm trying to find ways to communicate my boundaries that are not so off-putting. But I do struggle with having solid boundaries. Okay, the next one is we were raised in a paradigm where love was conditional. So if we did something wrong, we were threatened with disfellowshipping, which is being excluded and given the silent treatment by everyone you know in your religion and in your family. And that was a constant threat if you were going to do something wrong. And even if you weren't disfellowshipped, even if you just say you just didn't want to be in the religion anymore, then everyone you know is going to shun you, which is just not speak to you. They will unfriend you on social media. They will not speak to you. They will never call you up again. They will never ask you out to lunch again. You will not know them. It's like you're dead. And that is very traumatic to experience. It causes a lot of people to run back to their religion because they can't handle it. It's very manipulative. It's very coercive. And it teaches you that all the love you received from those people wasn't real. And it was conditioned on you believing a certain way and being in their culture with them. So we learned that love is conditional, and the pendulum swing to that is to just have unconditional love for everyone. Like, I never want to have conditional love for anyone. I want to have unconditional love for everyone. And so I will frequently accept people and love people who aren't treating me well, or who are gaslighting me, or who are crossing my boundaries, or who maybe are very unstable mentally. I just have unconditional love for them. And I don't want to, it has to be balanced, yes, but I think unconditional love is actually the goal of humanity right now. And so I'm kind of glad that I've been able to use how I was raised with conditional love to swing me into the new paradigm of unconditional love. And I want to stay in that place of unconditional love. But to be in a place of unconditional love makes you so vulnerable that you do really have to strengthen your boundaries. And since boundaries are already something I struggle with, that's my conflict in life, right? Okay. Okay, the next one I want to talk about is being in survival mode. This is the last one. We were taught as children in this religion that the end is coming. There's going to be an Armageddon, the apocalypse stories. We were given visual depictions as children in books of end times, people in fear, running for their lives. And we were taught to always be ready for that to happen and to be ready and jump into action. And so how that has affected me as an adult is that I'm always hyper vigilant for noticing like what's happening in the news, or what things are lining up for a catastrophe to happen. And sadly, I've lived through the Lahaina fires here on Maui and how that impacted our entire community. And I'm seeing it now playing out in Los Angeles with the fires where I'm from. And I'm also, I lived in California for a long time, so we had earthquakes. So these kind of catastrophes, they provoke so much readiness to jump in for me that I can sometimes over jump in or be over giving or just take it like it's, life or death. And so when the Lahaina fires happened, I caught myself really like exhausted and over helping, I guess. I don't know. Everybody was helping. Everybody was in that mode. But for me, it was just like, it was like part it was just part of who I was, and I just couldn't not help. And so I've had to learn to not help people or not help in situations where I'm not being asked to help. So really just kind of taking a step back and waiting to be asked, offering, but then also just not trying to fix everything and go into this survival mode. And also I tend to be an over giver, like I over help or I over give. So I really had to learn to balance that. I noticed it because I celebrate Christmas. We didn't celebrate Christmas as children, but I was really overdoing Christmas and really over giving on Christmas, and it wasn't serving my children well. So I've had to really learn to balance that and pull back a little bit on the over giving and being overly generous, because it's not always appreciated, and then I get taken advantage of. Okay, so let's talk about some of how I've learned to heal from all of this, all these patterns and all these imprints that were put on me just by being raised in this subculture where it really is like a subculture to me. It's interesting. One of my favorite college classes was cultural anthropology, and it's because just noticing that, like, it's not necessarily that it's wrong if it's a cultural paradigm. It's like how it's cultural. It's how we behaved as a culture. But when you leave that culture and you're now in a different culture, people think you're weird, and they don't understand. Why are you overgiving, and why are you having no boundaries with me, and why are you, taking responsibility for what I know is my own bad behavior, and so people don't always understand me, and then I get taken advantage of and disrespected. So just be aware of that. You were raised in a very specific culture, and you're no longer in that culture. And so while you're trying to adapt to being in the new culture, they're also trying to adapt to you, and they don't understand why you're acting weird. And sometimes you can become a target or a victim or be treated really poorly by people. I've been viciously attacked by people, and it's just because I'm a target, because I don't make sense in their paradigm. Okay. Also, like, the whole we're not broken thing is important to keep in mind. It's not that you're broken. A lot of people, I think, get told that they're mentally ill or there's something wrong with them. And you can really turn in on yourself and internalize that and put yourself through a ton of therapy and feel like it's not working or helping, because it's not that you're mentally ill or broken. Actually, you're probably highly intelligent, very kind. Most people are very emotionally intelligent even, and high functioning, like great jobs, high functioning, emotionally intelligent, very kind, caring, empathetic people, and they get told that they're mentally ill. And so it's something just to, if you have a different perspective, it's fine to get therapy and work through issues if you're having a hard time untangling some things. But a lot of therapists are not well versed in what it means to be raised in a high control environment or a high control religion. So you would have to find somebody that really is nuanced in that. But yeah, so I would just say that don't turn it on yourself. Just really understand it as from a different perspective, that you're raised in a different culture, and now you're outside of that culture trying to operate in a more mainstream culture, and there's a little bit of a disconnect. Okay, let's see, what else did I want to talk about here? Oh, so when I talk about the pendulum swing between like how we were raised to be versus the swing to the opposite direction, an example of that is we were raised to believe in this really extreme version of God, dogmatic, and then as in my early 20s I went into becoming an atheist, because for me it was a pendulum swing, and so I had to really find balance in that. I'm no longer an atheist, and it's something like kind of the phrase Catholic schoolgirls, like she behaves like a Catholic schoolgirl, and that's a phrase to say like how a Catholic schoolgirl is like the opposite. the opposite of a saint. You know, she's rebelling against something. And so it's this kind of rebellion that we have in our human nature to, when we're given something very extreme, to go to the opposite. So we're always trying to find balance in that and question that. But because questions are rude, we tend not to question. So that's something we have to learn to do. Let's see. So here's what I did. Here's what I recommend, and here's what I did to heal myself. And I just want to share this with you in case it's helpful to you. First of all, there were 2 questions that are very important to ask. One is, who would I be if I wasn't raised in this way? And mind you, I was raised in this way. So if you were also raised in this way, we have no reference for who we were before the religion, right? We've always had the religion, so this is how we are. But we don't want to be influenced by that high control religion anymore. We want to be able to go into the mainstream culture. So the question is, who would I be if I hadn't been raised that way? So it's a little bit of a imagination game, right? And then, what behaviors do I have that are a reaction to how I was raised? So that pendulum swing I'm talking about. So who would I be? Maybe I would be an atheist. But is that a reaction to how I was raised? Oh, yes, I see that it is. So that's not who I would be if I hadn't been raised that way. That's a reaction to how I was raised. So how I was raised is still affecting me in that choice. So then I had to come back from atheism to be like, if I hadn't have been raised in such an extreme dogmatic religion, I probably wouldn't have pendulum swinged to atheism. What would I be? What do I believe? And then that's where we can start to tune into our intuition and our intuitive knowing. And I started to do this in my early 20s, even in my teenage years before I left the religion, when I was trying to kind of find myself. You don't have a good, strong sense of yourself and who you are when you're raised in that way. And so as I was coming into my teen years and trying to establish who I am, which is what all teenagers do, I remember seeing a movie where the main character, she just knew a lot of things. She was very confident in what she believed. She was a teenager, and I just thought, like, she was so cool. I wish I knew everything about what I believed. And so I started tackling questions just one at a time, like, what do I believe about this controversial idea? What do I feel or believe about that controversial idea? And I held space for not knowing until I had a strong intuitive knowing. I remember one time somebody asked me what I thought about capital punishment, and I just had to say to them, like, I don't know yet. I don't know what I think about capital punishment yet. But when I have a strong knowing, I'll share it with you. And so over time, I did finally come to an awareness of what I felt about that, and my awareness was that I feel that it's wrong. I took an ethics class in college, and it helped me to see all sides of that issue and come to my own decision about it. So I will say, if you were raised in this kind of religion, one thing that helped me tremendously was going to college. And I wouldn't say just go to college for anything. Specifically for me, I focused on liberal arts classes that had a lot of psychology classes, a lot of ethics classes, a lot of philosophy classes, cultural anthropology. And so these will give you a full education about topics that we were shielded from as children. Evolution, human evolution, psychology, ethics, being able to talk about things like abortion and the death penalty without having a religious slant put on them. So that was tremendously helpful for me in my early 20s to go to college and take all of my core classes as an adult and really start to have, I took like a critical thinking class. I'm trying to think what other classes I took that were great, but so those all helped me to re-educate myself after having this very biased religious education as a child. Okay, so who would I be if I wasn't raised this way, and what behaviors do I have that are a reaction to how I was raised? So recognizing our pendulum swing and always trying to come back to a centered, balanced place. And then also, as an adult, I've had to really work with boundary issues. I tend to, I tend to have low expectations in loving relationships. I don't really know what it feels like to have unconditional love. And so boundaries is something I'm working on, understanding when I can say no. I have experienced a toxic shame wound getting triggered where I will feel repulsed by someone or disgust by someone. And so I've had to do some research into that and understand that the feeling of disgust is mine. It's coming from a wound that I have around toxic shame, being shamed as a child. And so the disgust that I feel for that other person, it comes from a place, the feeling of disgust is a parasympathetic response to like the body protecting itself from parasites or pathogens, is my understanding. And so when we have that feeling, it means that there's a shame wound that's been activated. And so then leaning into like, why am I feeling shamed right now? And sometimes that can lead you to something either that your partner is doing that you need to have a boundary around, or that you need to question if you should feel shameful about doing something. So like a lot of sexual things were shamed for us, but I didn't experience that as heavily. I mean, I heard a lot of weird stuff in our church meetings about women being subservient and all of that, but I think I just immediately rebelled against all those ideas in my mind as a child. But I think that it's interesting. So in my case, I was in a relationship with somebody who was a sexual narcissist, and I would start to feel disgust, and I didn't recognize it at first, but I had to really lean into it and be like, what's that really about? And then I realized that I was actually not being treated fairly in my sexual responses. And so there's a lot of things that you can work with there if that's coming up for you, and that you can lean into. I think there's a YouTuber that has a whole video about the disgust response, and she also was raised in a high control religion. So if you might find that on the internet. Yeah, so it's just about making sure that we don't get into abusive situations or get taken advantage of. People can see our pendulum swing into unconditional love as a vulnerability, and people can actually be really horrible to us. So just be careful. I also want to speak a little bit about self-protection. It's really important to have not just boundaries for people that you are wanting to have in your life, but also protection for things that don't need to be in your life. You don't need to have toxic people that you don't have a relationship with in your life. You don't need to have, we tend to be very empathetic and we can feel other people's emotions because how we were raised to be so aware of our surroundings and hypervigilant, and how we can shut down. Also a lot of, I noticed that I don't really have a fight or flight response. That response I think was kind of suppressed in me by being made to sit still for long periods of time and study and concentrate. And so the backup program for fight or flight is freeze or fawn. So I tend to do that. I also tend to be very observant because I can be still for so long and I'm just taking it all in to assess the risk. So that's something I'm aware that I do. Sometimes people can perceive me as being very aloof or distant or off-putting or even cold. And I'm certainly not a cold person, but I do get into this place of like super observant and not engaging until I assess if it's safe to engage. Let's see. So some of the things that I've done that have really helped me move through some of these patterns is I go to an Enlightenment intensive retreat twice a year, most years. I didn't do it in the pandemic year or the year following. But that is a really deep, intensive meditation work that helps peel off a lot of stories. It's good for all people. It's not just good for people that were raised like I. but I found it to be super helpful and helped me make some really profound shifts. So Enlightenment Intensive Retreats, highly recommend. It's a silent retreat, 4 days. You do a dyad style of meditation with another person. There's a ton of like introspective work. You really get a sense of your soul, like who you are on a core level. And that is really helpful to me, especially having been raised in a religion where I was told who I was. To really get this deep sense of knowing who I am is fantastic. So that I've done family constellation work, which helps to heal lineages, trauma in family lineages. Something really interesting that's very specific to this religion is this religion that I was raised in teaches you that you have no soul, if you can imagine. And so my father actually had never crossed over after his death. He died when I was very young and in an accident. And he was kind of stuck in the earth plane because he didn't believe that he had a soul. And we were able to do this family constellation work where I was able to speak to him. He was embodied by another person in the room. And I was able to speak to him and tell him that I loved him and tell him that he has a soul and that he had died and that he could cross over. And so I hope that helped him to be able to move on and for his soul to go through its journey to come back and do the work again. But I think it can be very hard for people when they die to actually cross over because they don't understand that they have a soul and that they have died. So family constellation work is great for rearranging and healing the past and healing in lineages. That's just one example of how it worked for me, but I've been a part of other family constellation. You can go and volunteer to help other people work through their family stuff, and you become a person that embodies their family member so that they can work with it. So it's a profound body of work. I really love it. I'm actually going to take the facilitator training to be able to hold it more. But that's something that you could think about looking into. It's really interesting. The other thing, let me think. There's other modalities. Meditation. I've been trained in transcendental meditation. Mindfulness is super important. When you've been raised in a high control religion, to be mindful, to hear what people are saying, and to not react, to absorb it, to think about, does that resonate with me, and to formulate a response. So that was some of the work that I did when I was deciding what I believed. Hearing out a lot of different things, seeing how that felt for me, being mindful of that those feelings could still be being affected by how I was raised, right? And then questioning those feelings a little bit more until I could really get to a core sense of my values that helped me decide how I wanted to engage with holidays, how I wanted to raise my children, how I wanted to be in the world outside of how I was indoctrinated and told I should be in the world as a child. So mindfulness practices, meditation, calms the mind. It brings your vagus nerve back online. It allows you to self-soothe and co-regulate or self-regulate actually. So meditation is great. I've also done breath work. I just had a breath work session this week that was amazing by a practitioner on Oahu, and I can't say enough. I've struggled with breath work sometimes in the past. There was a time when I was anemic, and so breath work I couldn't do it. But it really does cause profound shifts, and it really calms the mind, is how I've experienced it, and allows the need to distract from your thoughts to dissipate, right? So instead of like having wild thoughts that you can't control and being chaotic and out of control or very anxious, you can become mindful of the thoughts and you can observe And the help with the breath work helps the vagus nerve come online so that you can get out of the response of fight or flight or freeze or fawn for me, and actually actively work with what's arising. When I get stressed and I go into that freeze or fawn mode, it's just so I can't clean my house. I can't do anything. I'm just literally frozen, and I can't motivate myself to do anything. So it's really important for me to seek help from Reiki practitioners, breathwork practitioners, wherever I can get the assistance to get my parasympathetic nervous system back online, so that I can then be motivated to move forward and do things in my life instead of shutting down. I tend to shut down. And other people that have fight or flight, they might tend to run, right? So if your fight or flight is triggered, you might just run away. And for me, I'll just shut down. So it's really important to be aware of those kinds of things. I think there's a YouTuber that talks about this in the framework of attachment. His name is, what is his name? I think I wrote it down. Adam Lane Smith. So I like his work. Actually worked with I might work with one of his coaches. I talked to them yesterday, just to kind of have a better understanding of how the parasympathetic nervous system works, and how we can make sure that we don't go into those extreme responses when we're experiencing stress. Okay, that is all I have for now. I hope it's helpful to you. I think this year I would like to focus the channel a little bit more on diving into some of the healing modalities that I've worked with, whether it's the different meditation modalities, family constellation work, the Enlightenment intensive retreats, which I think are so profound and life-changing, and everyone should do it at least once. What else did I mention? There's energy healing. I'm a Reiki master, so I did become a Reiki practitioner because I wanted to learn how to organize energy within my own body, and I did that. I don't do it so much as a modality, but myself, but I do seek out energy healers to work with, especially when I'm stressed and I need to just move energy through my body. One time we had an event here where there was a huge windstorm. Some massive trees fell on my property. The energy that kicked up from that event just landed right in my body. And then, of course, I was in like a hypervigilant, like I think it triggered like my end times hypervigilance, like reaction. And then also just I had a hard time moving the energy through. So I worked with a woman here in Haiku that does body work, and it was super helpful to get that moved through, to get my parasympathetic nervous system regulated so that I wasn't in a freeze response mode and I could actually be productive again. So just give yourself some grace, drink a lot of water, when all else fails, drink a lot of good spring water, and don't turn in on yourself. You're not broken. And just recognize, observe and recognize how you're being treated, where you might need to have tighter boundaries, where you might be going into a reaction mode of a pendulum swing to the opposite of how we were raised. And always just seek balance. Balance in all things is wise. Thanks, everyone. Have a beautiful day.